For far too long, the effective management of the customer's experience has been considered a soft skill. But today, successful companies recognize that the customer experience is king, or from my perspective, is queen. Welcome to CX Unplugged. I'm Gabrielle Gonzalez, your host, and in this series, you will hear from me and other industry experts about how prioritizing the customer experience led to amazing outcomes. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. Everyone, I'm Gabrielle Gonzalez, your host on CX Unplugged by the Multifamily Media Network. And this is a special series called Lessons Learned, where I bring to you raw, real, and refreshingly honest stories from CX leaders who have been there, navigating challenges, rethinking strategies, and turning missteps into game-changing moments. Today, in our episode of Lesson Learned, we are sitting down with Jeremy Milton, head of multifamily operations at West Shore. Jeremy has risen to great success through his embodiment of a can-do attitude and a commitment to fostering a culture of continuous learning and development in every role that he's had. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I appreciate being. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, I know you're a busy guy, and I really do appreciate your time today. And I've got to say that it has been really, it's been really inspiring and fun to watch your incredible rise and your incredible professional journey over the last, 15 years or so. I don't know. Can I say that? You don't seem old enough for that to be a true statement, but I think it is.
The Gray says otherwise.
Yeah. You have definitely had, lots of successes in your experience, like I said, which has been really fun to watch. And I do also admire just seeing all of the way you demonstrate this constant and continuous learning, right? Always learning. How can I continue to grow? How can I continue to learn? I think that you preach a lot of that and share a lot of that wisdom and insight with the industry. And I think, I know I and many others in the industry really appreciate some of that wisdom and guidance that you share.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
But today, we are actually going to go a little bit different direction. So we are going to step back and explore some moments that shaped your journey and maybe some of those early career missteps that turned into game-changing lessons. So let's get ready for some insights, a few laughs, and plenty of takeaways that our listeners won't want to miss. So, Jeremy, we've all had those moments where we thought maybe something was a great idea or we executed something and thought it would be a great plan, and it ended up not being. Is there a situation that you can think of that you can share with our listeners where maybe that happened to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, we've made plenty of lessons learned or mistakes in the last 15 plus years, both in all roles, really. Property manager, regional manager, VP, director. We all have them. I can say a couple of my early on lessons learned from my first regional was, regionals don't talk to hear themselves talk. If they give direction about, I don't know, don't accept partial payments and file evictions and um, you know resolving a resident situation, I can think of 10 things in my first year. When I was with Bukovic, and being a hard-headed human being that I am, thinking that I've got this, the can do, right? It's just, we're going to do it. And, the one time you do take a partial payment and then all of a sudden the person doesn't pay, or maybe you know, maybe you let a conditional applicant move in when they didn't provide something and then you're filing eviction on them, or you're not walking a unit before move-in like your RM said to do so, because that's part of the process and there's a reason why, and you open it and there's no carpet in the apartment and move in. So there are a variety of different things, again, on all levels. And, one thing that I've learned, and one thing that it come to me quite difficult, believe it or not, is that we're going to make mistakes. I was raised in a culture where, it was almost stay between the lines. We were Eagle Scouts. We were this. We this. We didn't mess up. We just had that very high expectation of standard. Um, and so, yeah, making a mistake was not an option. But again, the lessons learned through all of this is that, as we do grow in our professional development, as you mentioned, taking courses to the Apartment Association, IRM, or even professional education. I recently finished my MBA, which we kind of talked about at one point. So um, use all of that experience plus the time with the folks that you work with every day and don't work with, and a lot of that wisdom is going to come from their mistakes so that you don't make them. And so that's, lessons learned. Like if an RM says to do something or a VP is given a little guidance, with a kind of a black and white situation, either go with the black or go with the white. Sometimes it's not always best to stick with the gray. So, okay.
Yeah. Interestingly put. Yes. Yes. And I think it's so interesting that you share, all those examples that you shared. I know I personally can completely relate with because I've done all of those things that, you're not supposed to do, but like in the moment, you think your heart is telling you, oh, this person, they'll pay. I'm not going to go ahead and file for eviction. They'll pay.
Exactly.
And then they don't pay. and, and then you're left explaining to your stakeholders why you've got these terrible delinquents on your profiles. I think that is the key. Is like you said, people are telling you these things. Your leaders, your guidance, the people that your mentors, they're telling you these things because they don't want you to experience some of the same stumbling blocks that they already inevitably did. We've all done that. I think one of the first missteps I shared on this lessons learned series was how I didn't adhere to the inspect what you expect guidance, right? Yep. And so I thought, I'd been in the business at least 6 months. I thought I was a complete expert at that time and I could handle it. I didn't need to really inspect. I'd just been there yesterday. Went to show an apartment. I opened up the door of the hallway and someone had taken a chocolate shake, literally, and like a melted and like flung it all over the hallway. Right. And so I opened the door and I'm like, ugh. Now, had I just done the inspection ahead of time, I wouldn't have been in that situation. So it's like there is a reason for these processes, but I feel like sometimes we have to learn things the hard way too. So I mean, I get it, but at the same time, like if we can help you not experience the heartbreak, I don't know, whatever the other words are, like embarrassment, humiliation.
This doesn't have to be the school of hard knocks. It does not have to be. I certainly agree with that. So.
Right. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And again, I'm certain that all of our viewers and listeners can relate to exactly every single one of those examples that you gave.
Yeah, it's a.
So obviously these things do happen. So over the term of a long-term career, you're inevitably gonna hit these stumbling blocks. You're going to be confronted with challenges. You're gonna make the wrong decision. It seems like a good idea at the moment.
Mhm.
Maybe it's only with, years of hindsight, right? That you can look back and realize that maybe it wasn't such a great idea. But do you have any kind of go-to strategies that you can share with our listeners so that maybe they don't have to wallow as long in that state of humiliation or frustration or whatever the case may be when things don't go as planned?
Yeah, so probably a couple strategies that I've kind of adopted over the years is the first one is there's always whatever mistake it is, big or little, or whatever lesson learned, big or little, you've got to debrief the situation afterwards. Walk through how it got there, what we did when we were there, and how we're not going to do that again. I think so many times, too often, we're in this such a fast paced environment that it's lease, move in, renew, collect, lease, renew, service, renew, collect. Like, we're in such a fast paced environment that when we do have an opportunity to learn from something, we don't. And I think that it also helps with your leadership development as well. It's like making yourself self-aware that, oh my gosh, I'm not doing that. I need to do that so it doesn't happen again, and I better help, whether that be a processy, like you said, whether that be an update to a policy or a procedure that needs to change. Whether it creates a better experience for the resident. I think all of that just got to stop and debrief what happened and really walk through where the bottom fell out, and how we're not going to do that again is one of them. So
Yeah, I think that's great. I really love that key, that debrief. So my question to you is this: do you find that people are, in today's sort of work environment, are open to the notion of like sitting in that mistake long enough to debrief on it and sort of dissect it, figure out like you said, where did we go wrong and how do we prevent this from happening in the future?
yeah, I would say it depends, right? I think it when people are most vulnerable, most willing to be part of those conversations, depends on the culture that you set in the organization. And the big part there is, I'm a big firm believer in an apologetic organization, apologetic culture where, yes, at least I made a decision and it didn't work, versus not making a decision at all. And I joked, literally, I was on site this week in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I looked at one of the managers and I said, "Listen, we're not putting people on the moon. We're literally just, anything can be undone. Just in doubt, make the decision. We have a relationship that we know we're gonna step on our feet, we're gonna trip and stumble, we're gonna fall, and we're gonna get through it. As long as we talk about it and we don't do it again, is when it becomes the most successful. But now on the flip side of that, there are cultures out there where, you hire a 15-year veteran of the business and they're president of 10,000, 15,000 apartment homes and 600 employees. You make one wrong mistake that costs the company $50,000 and you need to clean out your desk. Like, it's not going to talk about how we got there. So again, kind of depends on the culture, I think, on that's how it's received.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, yeah, you're right. And I think that it sort of just speaks to, the fact that people just want to feel safe, right? You want to feel safe, like, so you want to feel like you're in an environment where you can admit that you made a mistake. And to the individual, it may seem like a huge mistake, but maybe it's really a pretty simple mistake and it can just be very easily corrected. And we just move on down the road, right? We just use it as a learning opportunity. Um, that's really interesting. And I guess, obviously there are more consequential mistakes than others. Obviously, like a fair housing related mistake is going to be obviously more consequential than maybe a general policy or whatever procedural kind of mistake. Um, but it also makes me think about, well, I won't share that with today, but I mean there are just a lot of great insights, and I think that being able to debrief and really pick that apart is important. And one of the things that I think is super important too, and I used to always tell folks that I worked with, is like, we're hiring you because you're an adult, right? You're a grown up, you're an adult, you manage your own life, in many cases, your own family. Like, you're perfectly capable of making these kinds of decisions. And we want you to do that. And again, there aren't always necessarily right and wrong decisions. Sometimes there are, and sometimes there are things that are a little bit more challenging or more complex to come up with. But as an adult and a grown up, we want you to make that decision. And if it wasn't the right one, we'll talk about that and move on down the road.
Absolutely. No, and it's funny you mentioned that just yesterday with a regional manager in Charlotte, and it's like, run your business. Run your business. You were hired. You've got 15 plus years of experience. Run your business. And we were worried about a situation with CapEx and maybe kind of getting our hands slapped for moving forward with something we probably should have ran the flagpole. But nonetheless, we made a decision, and it's going to be fine. But yeah, just we hire people to run their business, and empower them to make good, informed, educated decisions. And some of them are not always good and informed, educated decisions. And because they're not educated people or educated decisions, it's because they haven't had that experience. They've not crossed that bridge in their career. And again, back to the apologetic organization. Like, you've got to be able to have an open door, open conversation if you're ever going to make your organization any better or grow, or make your people better. So
Agreed 100%. I'm curious, what kind of core values do you think are important in an organization that, or maybe would be in an organization that has more of that apologetic culture? Do you think, like, I guess my that I'm driving at another question too. I'm interested in, any of those potential core values. And then also I'm just interested is, like, is it true that, like, all the bigger companies are less forgiving than smaller companies, in your opinion?
yeah, I think for the larger organizations out there, let's call it more than 50,000 units, right? What you did find in those, and having worked for some of those organizations in my past, there's generally a culture at the mothership, if you will. There's a culture, right? But once you get into the sub markets and to different states and different regions, you start to have subcultures to the large culture, right? And so I think it just depends on how welcoming those subcultures are. Oddly enough, I just wrote a paper on this for the thesis. Oddly enough, um, and it's important. It's actually it makes for a more inclusive environment. It allows an organization to thrive a little more than others. Because again, I won't name company, but I've worked for a company where the Dallas office ran very, very different than the Fort Lauderdale office. And the Dallas office struggled with certain things, and the Fort Lauderdale office didn't. And I really do put a lot of emphasis on those subcultures to the big ship, about the success to the Fort Lauderdale office. So to answer your question, I think it's a yes and a no. Equally small companies, I think. Same. I think what happens is you find, I don't want to use the word clicks, but a small enough group, and you hire an outsider, and they don't find their fit into that mold, and so you lose it there too. But a couple of the words that I like: integrity, empathy, um, not really a value, but just be a good human. Like that's there's nothing, it's free to be nice to people, right?
I
And
love that.
yeah,
Yes.
so and that
Yes. It doesn't cost any
um
more or take any more time. Just be kind. Right.
but yeah, I think just kind of looking at it like that, I think it does exist. And I think it could go a couple different directions. And but the biggest part to all of that is it all starts here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh and it starts here with the vision, but then where it really starts is here, boots on the ground, and it is pushed up. So I really believe it's pushed up, not pushed down. Um, and I say that because walking by management by walking around is an actual theory, believe it or not. And Sam Walton used it quite a bit, and when he was alive, and You learn so much by being boots on the ground. Like you literally do. That's where your culture is. And really I've seen organizations change. I've seen people change. I've seen presidents and CEOs really flip the script and realize that they're doing a terrible job at fostering the culture that really is their company. So I digress. I could talk about that for probably 6 days.
Right, right. No, I love it. And I think our viewers really love that too and can really connect with that. And that's a you're right. That's like a whole other podcast. So we'll get back to that. Um but yeah, culture is so important. And you made me recall when I was a property manager on site. um, I often likened it to being the mayor of a small town, right? Because I was out every single day. I walked the property every day. I walked, areas that we didn't get to as much, those less, desirable units, those less desirable maybe walkways that just weren't as frequently utilized. But I walked that all the time to make sure that our quality and our quality across the board, what we were saying to people, was consistent with what we were doing consistently across the property. So just because that building over there has got like a lot of shade on it, and maybe people don't love those units as much, but that we were paying equal attention to the landscaping, there, or maybe even doing it a little bit more so that that area would be as desirable as the other area, in spite of its particular location characteristics or whatever. But you just seeing the people, the residents, the vendors, interacting with them, interacting with the buildings, the landscaping, the campus itself, and all of that, you really are like a mayor of a small town, or at least that's how I likened it. And I reflect back on that time with such admiration, because I think that was actually my favorite job, was being a property manager on site. Like, I
Yeah.
think I liked that the best because it is boots on the ground.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. Yeah. No, I can relate to that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, with all of that, we're talking about lessons learned, and I think our viewers would love to have a great takeaway. So, if you have one piece, one juicy nugget, right, of wisdom to share with our viewers, what is that word of wisdom for those who are maybe new to the industry or still trying to climb that ladder, that corporate ladder of success? What kind of advice would you give them?
So twofold, couple of things here, I think. The first one is you've got to find your why in this business. It's absolutely critical to your success. And not everyone's why is the same thing. It's your, your utopia. Like it's your happy, if you could build a perfect place, that would be your why. And it's not a thing, right? It's a feeling. And so find your why and ensure every day your feet hit the pavement, hit your floor, get out of bed, you're following your why. And that took me probably 14 years to figure out in this business. Um, because it's like, they have a property manager, you're a little bit of everything. And so you don't have a whole lot of time to reflect on what is your why and what's the why behind all of this, right? And so I was very privileged to work for a great company where the senior executive on the property management side uh, hired some executive coaches for us a couple of years ago, and went through 6 months of the session, and meeting with this coach 2 times a week, and then ultimately 1 time a week, and the whole session was about finding your why. What really is Jeremy good at? What is Jeremy? And it's so let me rephrase that. Not only what Jeremy is good at, but what does Jeremy like to do? Like, because sometimes what we're good at and what we like to do are not the same thing. So, and I ultimately found out what my why was. I'm a cultivator of relationships and people, and I really enjoy being in a VP level, whether that's in operations or client services, business development. I love fostering relationships, and that feeds my cup. It fills my cup, as Dr. Debbie would say. So, you know, that's one of them. Find your why, and don't break it for anything, because when you do, everything will just go sideways. It always does, because you lose the passion, you lose the drive, and people start to feel that, especially in a leadership role. You're not allowed to let other people feel that you're losing your why. Okay, they can't feel that.
Yeah.
Very important lesson to be learned at in the last 6 years for me on that part. The other side to that is that slow down. I think the last 5 years, everyone that gets in our business, multifamily business, you get hired, you're right out of college, or maybe you're making a career change. You're a leasing consultant for 6 months. Now you want to be an assistant manager. You do that for 6 months. Now you want to be a manager. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years, 24 months, same property, 280 units, you want to be a regional manager and oversee 2,000 units and 6 properties and all of that. And you just keep driving, you drive and you drive. And it's great to have drive. One thing that I learned, and one thing I wish I would have learned, one thing I would have learned earlier on in my career is that, yes, my drive is important. And yes, you always got to have it to get where you're going. But there is a thing, believe it or not, is going too fast and having too much, because the term is a railroad people on the way to get there. And then also, too, you don't have the experience to know what you don't know. And so all the people that are telling you to slow down, learn this role very well, learn how to do this well, do all the work, be a doer for a very long time, understand the ins and outs of it. And then slowly grow. Me and my president yesterday were talking about, to be a regional manager for us at West Shore, promotion internally. We really want you to be a manager for 5 years. Like, we're a tough organization. We're not for everybody, but we also empower our people to make very large and important business decisions, and so we want them to be well equipped to do that. And I'll say this to kind of wrap this topic up on my the advice is that, I wanted to be the leader of an organization so bad, so bad. Gosh, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And one of my mentors, she, we'll get there, we'll get there, we'll get there, we'll get there. Well, then I got a new supervisor, and quickly found myself out of a promotion because I didn't just slow down and trust the process.
Trust.
There,
Mhm.
trust the process. There is a reason that these people, your leaders, have 25 plus years of experience, and they're the president, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, CTI, CXO. What here we are. So, but there's a reason they're there, and if you find a good one, don't let them go anywhere. Listen to their words of wisdom. Take every day like it's a new day, like you've never learned anything before. And trust me, the minute I started doing that, I was running 450 employees, 25,000 apartment homes, 100 plus communities. I had the state of my own. I was building business, I was cultivating relationships, and I was making more money than I ever have. And so when you just stop, slow down, trust the process, everything really does come together if you really want it that bad.
Wow. Those were, I don't know if I could have gotten better words of wisdom. I think that was an amazing recap and summary that our listeners can really take to heart and, put down as a guide map for their success as well. Your professional growth has really been an inspiration and should be a tremendous roadmap to follow. I think your vulnerability is admirable, and I appreciate you being willing to share it with us for the benefit of all of us in this industry, right? To learn from that, learn from one another. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today, Jeremy.
Thank you for letting. I appreciate it as well.
Well, I thank you for being here. Thank our listeners for joining us on this episode of CX Unplugged Lessons Learned from the Multifamily Media Network. I hope you will join us next time. Stay tuned for more lessons learned on CX Unplugged from the Multifamily Media Network. Bye-bye for now. CX Unplugged, where we have redefined who your customer really is. Join me next time to hear more missteps and masterful manifestations in the world of multifamily customer experience. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network.